Thank you very much to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade, the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, the Centres of Asia-Pacific Excellence, which of course includes the Southeast Asia, North Asia and Latin America CAPES, and the Ministry of Defence. And thank you also to the supporting partner, the Asia-New Zealand Foundation.
We would now like to welcome our next speaker, Dr. Kurt Campbell, who the Prime Minister referred to earlier, Deputy Assistant to the President and the National Security Council Coordinator for the Indo-Pacific in the current Biden administration. It is a new role within the National Security Council. He formerly served as Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs in the Obama administration.
And prior to re-entering government service, Kurt was Chair and CEO of the Asia Group and has been dubbed an Asian czar by some commentators who note that there is no American who knows more about Asia and is better known in Asia than him. He also has a strong connection to New Zealand. Kurt was in Christchurch during the 2011 earthquake, along with other US congresspeople at the New Zealand-US Partnership Forum. And in the 2014 New Year's Honours was made an honorary companion of the New Zealand Order of Merit for services to New Zealand-US relations.
And just a reminder, please do submit your questions for Kurt using Slido, and we will aim to get through more of them this time than we were able to with the Prime Minister. Welcome, Dr. Kurt Campbell. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Oh, frankly, it's my honor to be with you all today, and I'm incredibly grateful to follow the Prime Minister. There are few leaders on the international stage that we in the United States look to with more admiration, and we're incredibly grateful for the leading role that she plays on so many different things. And I just want to indicate to all of you, she did a wonderful presentation a few weeks ago at the Council on Foreign Relations. And I think, can everyone hear me?
We can now. We've missed the beginning of your address. Apologies.
Okay, I'm so sorry. Is that okay now? I'm sorry.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, I apologize. Let me just begin and just say again, it's an honor and a thrill to be with you all today. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to address you directly and to particularly to follow the Prime Minister. Prime Minister Ardern is deeply, highly regarded here in the United States. She's a leader that inspires us. Who has done a magnificent job on so many issues, from extremism to dealing with critical issues like climate change. She encourages us to focus more on critical issues in the Pacific and Asia. And frankly, we are extremely hopeful. We're ambitious for the next phase in the relationship between the United States and New Zealand. So I'm grateful for the chance to be with you today. I'm just going to say a couple of things, and then I'd be more than pleased to take any questions or comments as we go forward. So let me just say that the United States understands that from the period going forward, the lion's share of the history of the 21st century is going to be written in the Indo-Pacific. And our objective will be to ensure that as we go forward, that the operating system, and that's a loose description of the things that fit together in a complex way, freedom of navigation, issues associated with trade, with our forward deployed engagement with allies and partners, the rule of law, all of those things taken together have given us over the last 40 or 50 years the most important progress on the planet in history. And our goal as we deal with a more complex region going forward is to ensure that elements of that operating system remain intact, that it's negotiated carefully among participant nations if there need to be adjustments, and that we maintain elements of free and open Indo-Pacific, and that those characteristics remain dominant as we go forward. I think we know and we all acknowledge that there are challenges to that system. We are concerned by recalcitrant North Korea, a country that still demonstrates its nuclear ambitions. We're concerned by some elements of Chinese power and some of its aspirations in the Indo-Pacific. We're concerned by regional tensions in a variety of places. We're worried about setbacks in democracy in fledgling countries like Burma, Myanmar. And we look more generally at a region that will be called on to play a critical role if we're to address issues like climate change, like combating the pandemic in an effective way. So what the Biden administration is trying to do in a complex way is to respond to the current challenges. And I will tell you all, New Zealand friends, the most important ingredient in a successful strategy is for the United States to respond domestically. And I think we all understand that in many respects, the United States has been wounded, that there are elements of our democracy that have been challenged, that the coronavirus has been extremely difficult here as it has been elsewhere, and that the president has insisted that the most important ingredient in our overall strategy is to recover domestically, and also to focus on our economic revival, and where possible, to try to heal some of the divisions that have become so apparent in our own country and that were on full display on January 6th. So the primary focus of the initial period of the Biden administration has been on engaging domestically. At the same time, we are also focused on working closely with allies and friends. And you will have seen that in deep discussions in Europe, the president's initial diplomacy across Europe, including with the G7, G11, and also more recently with engagements, bilateral engagements with countries like Japan, South Korea, and also the fledgling initial effort of the Quad, the pairing of the United States, Japan, Australia, and India as part of an effort to bring together democracies with an interest in the maintenance of peace and stability across the region as a whole. I will say that we are thrilled by the initial diplomacy and engagement that we've had with New Zealand. That will continue later this week. I believe we will engage closely and deeply on APEC. We also are looking forward to hosting a visiting delegation here in Washington, D.C. From New Zealand. We are involved in strategic discussions about every element of our shared approach to the region and to the world, and we're grateful for the deep partnership, frankly, with Wellington. I expect that over the next little while, we will be talking intensively about our shared perspective of challenges and opportunities in Asia. We will talk more about the Pacific and some of the challenges that the Pacific faces in terms of health, matters related to climate change, the health of the fishing stocks, a number of different things that we think will be critical in our bilateral relationship as we go forward. So I just want to say, having worked closely on New Zealand for decades, I'm extremely ambitious about what we can accomplish together. I'm grateful for the partnership that we share on so many issues. The United States, as you know, recently joined the Christchurch Initiative, which we believe was an extraordinarily effective mechanism to explore the root causes of extremism online and in all of our societies. So I just want to say that it's my pleasure to be with you today. I don't want to go on too long. I'd rather take your questions more generally. But I do want to just say that in the United States, there are so many admirers of New Zealand. And frankly, in many respects, even during our dark periods and our challenging times, we look to New Zealand for inspiration and for motivation, both as a model for how we can go about our own democracy, but also for your leading role in international relations, global politics, and particularly in the Indo-Pacific. So more to follow. We are excited about what we can accomplish economically, strategically, politically, militarily, and across a number of existential issues like climate change. I'll stop there, and I would be more than pleased to take any questions or comments. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Campbell, for that address. We've got a lot of questions here, so we'll try to get through as many of them as we can. I'll start with the top-rated question here, which is about, it asks, what is the Biden administration's long-term strategy when dealing with rising threats in the Indo-Pacific? And what are the key indicators or signs that New Zealand should look for that this strategy is succeeding going forward?
Well, look, I do want to underscore that our ultimate goal is the maintenance of peace and stability in Asia. The United States does not seek a new Cold War. We do not seek a harmful or deleterious competition with China. What we are seeking is a stable relationship. We recognize that a dominant feature of that relationship will be competition, but we believe that competition can often bring out the best in countries and people, and that's what we're seeking to do. We recognize that the dominant arenas of that competition are likely to be in technology, in things like 5G, in AI, artificial intelligence, robotics, quantum computing, human sciences. And so we are putting in place strategies that seek to magnify and amplify our own capabilities, but at the same time restrict certain engagements that we feel undermine our national strengths. And I do want to say specifically, we are seeking to work with partners. Now, this is a non-political event, and it looks to us, frankly, as we're sitting here, that you're having a lot more fun than we are here. But I will say the difference that you will see, I believe, in the Biden administration from the previous Trump administration is that we will seek to do things more with partners. And we recognize that the only way we can be effective globally is to work more generally and creatively and strategically with partners. And so you're going to hear a lot more about the United States working not only with countries that are involved in Five Eyes, but also Japan, South Korea, and other countries in Southeast Asia. And we believe that New Zealand has an absolutely critical role to play. I don't think there is another country, I'm trying to search my mind, that potentially punches so far above its weight as New Zealand. I do not believe that there will be, the things to look for in the Indo-Pacific will be the level of diplomacy, the determination to work peacefully, to try to ensure that there is a degree of transparency on strategy. Those are all things that we will be seeking. And I believe that over time that you will see that the pieces of our strategy are designed to ensure a fulsome engagement from all partners and not to have the region dominated by any one country as we go forward.
Thank you very much. You talked a lot about the Quad. How important is the Quad to Indo-Pacific security? And would you encourage New Zealand to deepen engagement with the Quad?
Yeah, thank you. So I would say at the current time, what we believe is most important about the Quad is that it is practical and that it offers solutions and options for countries, that it is not some new NATO or some kind of military alliance, but instead a practical association of maritime democracies that are committed to a common vision on many fronts. So you will note that the first gathering of the virtual Quad, and we will have one in person later this year, but the first virtual gathering, the big initiative that was announced, was a four-way effort to increase the production capacity in India to produce vaccine to the number of 1 billion for ASEAN in late 2021 and 2022. We stand by that commitment, we're proud of it, and that is an indication of practical work of the kind that we want to do going forward. I've said publicly, and others have, that we have some ambitions to do some things in infrastructure, building on what President Biden announced in Europe in the Build Back Better world, and we will be working closely with our partners going forward. I believe that over time, that it will be possible and indeed valuable if we think about having associations that might be described Friends of the Quad, in which countries that are particularly interested in some of the working groups and work that is being undertaken on cybersecurity, on maritime, on humanitarian relief, you name it, that there are opportunities for like-minded and other states to join in. I can think of no other partner that I'd like to see involved more than New Zealand. I think we intend to keep New Zealand closely briefed. We're at early stages in the actual Quad. This is the first actual in-person leaders meeting. And so we have to walk before we can run. So the formal and fundamental engagement is to ensure that the four partners are aligned. But over time, this is not an exclusive club. It is not in any way meant to deny entry to other nations that want to lend a helping hand on efforts like how to deal with the pandemic, like how to grapple with climate change, how to deal with infrastructure. There will be seats and room at the table as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Kurt, there have been a few questions about trade. So, and I do want to ask, you have said in the past that RCEP was a wake-up call for the US, and I know that you are a veteran of TPP. So what steps do you think would be necessary to see the US back in the regional trade game?
Yeah, thank you. And we acknowledge that the economic piece of our strategy is of critical importance, and you're going to see elements of that. As I mentioned, the Build Back Better World initiative has in it some specifics around how to step up our work on infrastructure. We're exploring a number of things that we can do with respect to economic engagement on climate change. But at the same time, we underscore and understand clearly that trade is the lifeblood of Asia, and that countries in the region look at the United States to have an open, engaged, optimistic stance with respect to trade engagements in the region. I've said publicly before that we're exploring a lot of different things. It's still early days. I think one of those things is some engagement on digital. It's too early to talk about details, but I do want to underscore that we in the Biden administration understand the significance of this in the region and a desire for the United States to play an active role. It's hard to say this, but I'd ask for a degree of patience and a recognition of some of the challenges that we've faced. And I think the president has indicated that he wants to be a full partner across the full spectrum of issues in the Indo-Pacific. And so I would simply say you're going to have to watch this space as we go forward.
Thank you. We'll look forward to that.
Our Prime Minister spent a long time talking about the importance of the Pacific and regional architecture like the Pacific Islands Forum. And there's a question here that says, in light of the decision of the 5 Micronesian nations to withdraw from the Pacific Islands Forum, what impact will this have on US interests in the Pacific and the stability of the WCPO second island chain?
Yeah, thank you. And if I can just underscore again the importance of New Zealand. In all our discussions with your excellent ambassador here, with other New Zealand representatives and diplomats, there is a constant reminder of our role in supporting Australia, New Zealand, and other countries in the Pacific. And it is a reminder of our moral, of our strategic, of our historical requirements to engage actively. I've spent quite a bit of time in the Pacific. I would be the first to say that the United States has to substantially step up its game in the region. I will tell you that we are deeply engaged right now in diplomacy with New Zealand about how to go about doing that. That means more resources, how we engage our Coast Guards more directly, how we focus on issues associated with dealing with the pandemic, how we deal with traditional problems of poverty and obesity and health security. All those issues on top of climate change and fishing, we are addressing directly. I do believe, and I want to be careful here not to involve in the delicate politics of the Pacific Island nations. We think the defections from the group, the the walkaways have been troubling and concerning. And I think we'd like very much to be part of an effort to bring countries back together, to reconvene consensus among all the island partners, to find the best ways. That the problems are so overwhelming, they're so challenging, that we are better off tackling them together and in partnership. And so I think what you will see is the United States trying to work with others carefully, encouraging in an effort to try to bring elements of unity back to the Pacific Islands, given the magnitude of what we're facing together.
We have a great question here from Bryce Wakefield, who is from the Australia Institute of International Affairs. He asks, New Zealand is reluctant to expand the remit of Five Eyes beyond intelligence. Is the US keen to make Five Eyes a platform for broader foreign policy cooperation? And if so, how will the divergence be managed?
So look, I do want to say that we're very comfortable with the partnership that we've seen in Five Eyes. New Zealand is a partner in excellent standing. We've worked very closely with these countries for years. Five Eyes is only one piece of a much larger strategy in Asia and the world. I think you'll see efforts to try to expand other countries to participating perhaps on the margins or on the edges of this group more generally, but we're very satisfied and pleased by the engagement of New Zealand in this effort. And in fact, I do not believe there has been any discord in this group whatsoever. It is often the case that New Zealand and the United States have discussions about how we see the world and how we see the Indo-Pacific. They are among the most productive, helpful, illuminating discussions that I've had and I continue to have on diplomacy. I would just say that the United States is very satisfied with our engagement with Indonesia bilaterally, and we believe that New Zealand is a very productive and effective partner in the Five Eyes process, and I expect that will continue as we go forward.
Thank you. Moving back to trade, we've talked a bit this morning about Indigenous inclusion, and there's a question here: how can we ensure more equitable benefits from international trade deals, especially for Indigenous populations?
So, look, I would say that, frankly, that New Zealand has some of the same concerns about trade that groups in the United States do. So what we find often is that when we talk about trade, there are groups in the United States and elsewhere that make the argument, look, trade cannot simply be for the big multinationals, that any agreement or any initiative must be able to address issues associated with the environment, with labor concerns, with disenfranchised populations, and as importantly as anything else, the working class in the United States and elsewhere. That's a very high bar, but it's something that I think together our countries will be able to address. My view is that we need an honest discussion about what's possible going forward, and hopefully set parameters out that frankly address trade in a way that will build more public support in societies that have frankly suffered in terms of economic dislocation, like the United States and other countries in Europe more generally. So I am of the view that we have to expand not only the results of trades, but the application of it, so that it is not seen as simply serving the interests of the very few, but is broadly representative of lifting all peoples up as we go forward.
Thank you. Okay, now we have the highest rated question here, which I will ask, and it's about Taiwan, which I know is a delicate subject, and it's widely seen as potentially the biggest flashpoint between the US and China. So there is a question here: why won't the US recognize Taiwan as an independent nation? And I might add to that and ask, what kinds of things should New Zealand be thinking about in terms of the Taiwan Strait?
Look, as you can imagine, this is a delicate and sensitive issue, and I'll try to answer carefully. Look, the United States fundamentally believes that the maintenance of the status quo across the Taiwan Straits is in the best interests of all parties. We support a one China policy. We do not support Taiwanese independence, but at the same time, we have a strong and we want a thriving relationship, an unofficial relationship between the United States and Taiwan. And we are determined to maintain that peace and stability through careful engagements, through deterrence, through necessary military actions, and through engagements with partners who share our interest in the maintenance of peace and stability. I do want to underscore that we believe that the last period over the last 30 or so years, Taiwan's progress has been remarkable. Its democratization, its growth in civil society, all its many achievements are something that we can be very proud of, and we'd like those to continue in the framework that has been established.
Thank you. Sticking with the China theme and a question around motivation. Is the increased influence of the US military advancement in the Indo-Pacific region a move based on the safety and well-being of the Pacific or the suppression of China's military grasp?
Look, I would just simply say, if I can, so if you look at the last 40 years, by almost any measure, they have been the best 40 years in China's long, illustrious history. Remarkable progress economically, strategically, engagement with partners, lifting people out of poverty. And the primary ingredient in that has been the hard work and ingenuity of the Chinese people. But it is undeniable that progress took place in a larger framework that the United States was the key architect to help build. So it has been the United States that has created the conditions through which China has seen this remarkable success. So I would just underscore to your questioner that the United States has indeed taken steps to help facilitate China's growth and progress, and we do not seek to contain or undermine China. What we are seeking instead is for China, along with other countries in the Indo-Pacific, continue to adhere to some of the key features of the regional order that have been so productive and effective for all of us. We believe that there are signs in China's diplomacy and economic activities that are antithetical to some of these global norms and values that you see expressed in the Indo-Pacific over the last 30 or 40 years. And so our primary goal with all of our tools, not just our military tools, but our soft power, our partnerships with countries like New Zealand, Australia, Japan, the Quad, is to set the terms for what we hope will be a future that is on a shared vision of peace and prosperity without coercion, without fear or favor, in a world of enormous opportunity going forward. So the United States is not seeking to operate as a hegemon, but more as a convening player and strategic actor in the region that has an interest, not only for the region as a whole, but for the United States in this larger maintenance of peace and stability and an order that has been beneficial to all of us for quite a long time now.
Thank you. We've got a few questions in here that have come in, and sorry for jumping all over the place, but we have
That's okay.
there are a lot of questions to get through. How does the US intend to help the effects of climate change in the Indo-Pacific region? We have had quite a few questions here about climate change.
Yeah, look, I think we all have to be deeply concerned. Much of the science that's come in recently around ocean warming, about acidity in the oceans, around aberrant weather patterns in the United States and elsewhere, is a clarion call that effects that we thought were going to happen in 30 or 50 years are happening now. And so the urgency is profound. I must say, one of the people that inspire me the most is our Secretary Kerry and the people that are working assiduously on COP26. I think we have to up our ambitions considerably. There's a recognition that just setting goals for 2050 is not sufficient, that we need to take much more ambitious goals for 2030. That requires weaning us, I think, first and foremost from coal. I will say, I think the United States, other countries are taking important steps. We're going to need China. China has talked a good game, frankly, on climate change, but they are by far and away the biggest burner of coal. By some measures, they're contributing more than 50% to global emissions as we speak. They're going to have to take steps urgently now, not just in 15 or 20 or 30 years, but to address the important and critical demands of addressing climate change. The Pacific Island nations face a myriad of challenges. Low-lying nations face existential questions. I'm actually very grateful for some of the hard work New Zealand has done there. Clearly, some mitigation strategies, other things are going to be important as we go forward. I would say that what you've heard from President Biden and our team reflects that both at the first stage of the climate summit, what we will see later this year at the G20, and then at the COP26, is a determined, ambitious American effort to help lead the global community towards ambitious goals that can and will be met to keep global temperatures within a range that is sustainable as we go forward. But I would simply say that the evidence that is accumulating should be alarming to all of us. Any of us who have any interests in sort of how the kind of planet that we hand to our children must understand that among all the issues that we are addressing, this issue takes primacy.
Another question here, how would you say the United States' approach to encouraging the strength and growth of democracy has developed since earlier efforts from the 1970s?
Oh, it's such a good question, and it's a painful one for us because although we are going to do what we can to host some sort of gathering of democracies, I don't think that there can be any doubt that across Latin America, parts of Africa, in the United States and in ASEAN and elsewhere, democracies are facing enormous pressure. The United States has experienced an upheaval. On January 6th, we see ongoing efforts to restrict voting. We have enormous domestic divisions that concern us more generally. So I would say that President Biden talks a lot about a time where we have to demonstrate the viability and the effectiveness of democracies and that we can get things done. Again, I hope you'll excuse me for playing to the audience here, but we look at what your Prime Minister has done in a number of crises, and frankly, it's a model of how a modern Democrat and visionary leader should lead. And we seek to try to do what we can in the United States, but we have to approach this effort in a manner in which we are humble, and we realize that democracy is fragile, and it can't be taken for granted. Each generation has to pay its own price to reinvigorate it. We're facing more challenges than ever before. So not only do we want to talk to other countries about champion a model that we still think is the best, we look to those countries to inspire and help us. And no country has done that better or more than New Zealand, to be frank.
Thank you. There's a question here around Australia's view of New Zealand's defence spend. And the question is, Australia is often very critical of New Zealand's low defence spend. What is the US's view?
I don't think Australia is critical of New Zealand. I occasionally a little aside, but I think the partnership between Canberra and Wellington is actually quite strong. Look, all countries struggle with arriving at the right measurement for the security picture. I think we've had very strong discussions with New Zealand about the way forward, things that they're thinking about in terms of investments and the like. Countries can always do more, but I will say, as we look at the last challenges that we've faced in Afghanistan and elsewhere, the country that has been there to support us, has been a leading partner, has been New Zealand and its special forces. I'm grateful for the role that New Zealand plays across the board, not just in a narrow security realm, but diplomatically, trade, economically, all the things that we've been discussing. I know that occasionally there's the friendly, fraternal engagement between Australia and New Zealand, but I assume that most of it is quite good natured.
Sticking with the defense theme, what role would the US see New Zealand defense and security apparatus play on regional security challenges?
Thank you. Look, where we look for New Zealand leadership is a stronger role in the Pacific. We believe that that's going to be critical going forward, maintaining oversight of key fishing areas, engagement, security engagement with partners in the Pacific, occasional efforts at peacekeeping and the like, working within multilateral groupings. We believe New Zealand has a critical role to play in UN peacekeeping, as it always has. We'd like to see New Zealand play a role in some maritime engagements more directly, and just active engagement in multilateral fora where the United States plays a leading role. So I see New Zealand playing a very positive role. I think, if anything, I'd like to see the United States and New Zealand more actively engaged across the board, including on the security side in the Pacific. That would be my ambition for the next 5 to 10 years. And frankly, the country that needs to do more here is probably not New Zealand, but the United States.
There's a question here about political polarization, which we here in New Zealand see as being a huge problem in the US. The question specifically is, how will the Biden administration pass a form of a price on carbon? Are you confident the US can pass this to combat climate change?
So I'm going to answer the first part of the question. The second part, in terms of the strategies for dealing with climate change, I'm going to lead to our lead climate negotiator and our teams. They're busy engaged in what are the best practices for dealing with both restricting carbon emissions and how we best deal with strategies to combat climate change. But I will talk about the larger questions of political division inside the United States. President Biden in our system came up through the Senate. It had a key defining role for him as a young man. Most or many of his good friends in the Senate were Republicans. He's maintained those relationships. He insists to us that as we talk about the Asia-Pacific, about the Indo-Pacific, and about China, to work across the aisle. He's deeply committed to bipartisanship. You see that in his attempt to work with Republicans on infrastructure more generally. Although our country is fractious and divided, I believe deep down most Americans would prefer to work together and understand that the challenges are so deep and so profound that they require us working constructively. But I am under no illusions about the challenges of multiculturalism in the United States. Not multiculturalism, but people who resist that or have concerns about what that means. Issues of income inequality, accumulation of wealth, lack of access to health care, of deeply unfair circumstances in terms of jobs and other social services. Those are things that the United States has to address. I think you'll see ambitious efforts on the part of the president over a sustained period. You see some of that. He gave a major speech today on voting in Philadelphia, which in many respects is the heart of our democracy, in which he said that the central feature that separates us from so many others is the ability and the ambition and the desire to vote. Remember, in our country for a long period of time, a huge segment of our population, people of color, were not allowed to vote. People fought and died for that, and to have it be taken away cavalierly is antithetical to everything that we believe. And so, this is a challenge that is enormous, but it is one that the president and his team are seized by.
Thank you. Moving on in terms of our geography, there's a question here that says, how do you see the role of India change in the midst of present and emerging regional issues?
Look, I would say that of all the countries in the Indo-Pacific, we're probably most ambitious about the partnership between the United States and India. It's a complicated relationship. We've had periods in the past where it's been hard to find common cause. What we have seen are deeper engagements between our countries, a recognition of India's critical strategic responsibilities and our shared alignment on many issues. You will have seen that in recent weeks and months, India initially was hit very, very hard by COVID. The United States tried to help convene international efforts, certainly domestically, bringing together business and other groups to support India in its time of need. I believe that ultimately the partnership between the United States and India will be very close over time, but we will overcome some of the histories of the non-aligned and worries of, entrapment, all those things that have basically bedeviled previous generations of strategists and diplomats. And ultimately, we are destined to work closely together. I also believe that what we're seeing in many respects is a reorientation of Indian foreign policy and strategic perspective outside of its more narrowly defined region and more towards the Asia-Pacific arena that New Zealand and the United States are more engaged and comfortable in. And I think both New Zealand and the United States welcome that active participation and vision on the part of Indian friends.
Thank you very much, Kurt. There are still lots of questions here, but I am mindful of time and that we are holding everyone up from morning tea here in Wellington. But one last question that we can close off on, and I'm guessing here that it's come from one of the students. About a third of our delegates are tertiary students. And the question is, what do you admire most about New Zealand?
That's really a good question. I don't know if I would say there's any one thing. I admire the way that New Zealand is attempting to engage and bring together indigenous populations into your dominant culture. I admire your outward stance, that you're focused on the world, that you understand the importance of engagement with the world. I admire that you're an outdoor, rugged people that love sport and that you're good at it. I admire your prowess on the rugby field or on a sailing ship. I like the fact that you're prepared for mateship or friendship, and that you tend to try to take countries at their best and recognize the positive things that they bring to bear. And, I think there's a sense of adventure and almost mysticism associated with a lot of things that New Zealand brings to the world. My best vacations, my best engagements, some of my best friends are there. So I'd love to be able to say there was any one thing, but it's one of the few places. I think the highest compliment I can give is that I think over the last year or so, and I don't want to be political, but we had our own political challenges, and we were facing COVID, I remember we'd get together with friends, and sometimes one of us would just say, I'm going to move to New Zealand. And it was never anywhere else. It was always New Zealand. And I always take that as a great compliment. So I'll use that as my farewell. And it's just a pleasure to be with you today. And I am grateful for the partnership and extraordinarily appreciative of the role that New Zealand plays, both as a model and as a partner. So thank you for allowing me to join you this morning. Have a good rest of the conference. I'll look forward to hopefully engaging many of you individually or the organization as we go forward. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Kurt. To add to your list, we also admire our ability to get other people to tell us how much they admire us. On behalf of all the conference delegates, thank you so much for your time and your very
good at
and your very useful and frank insights. The US is a friend, and it's great to have had you with us today. And
thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kurt.
Thanks, Herman.
Thank you. Now, for the rest of the conference, we're going to be splitting into two sessions.